Many in the automotive collecting world know the 1963 to 1965 Riviera as one of the most beautiful vehicles arguably ever produced, certainly by the Buick division and even General Motors. The 63 Riviera set a new design direction for GM as it transitioned from the rather bulbous and large late 1950s vehicles into much more lean, mean, and overall modern vehicles of the 1960s. And the vehicle was beautiful both inside and out. Take a look at this interior in this particular Riviera, and you notice this gorgeous real wood trim and the center console that is flowing up into the instrument panel, which, by the way, was shared with other 1963 Buicks, but in this case, the center console really made it and was not available in the other Buicks. The Wildcat did have its own center console, but didn't look anything like this, and it wasn't connected to the instrument panel. In any case, one of the fun facts that many don't realize about the 1963 to 65 Riviera is that it really didn't start out as a Buick at all when it was first designed. In fact, take a look at these areas that are covering the headlights on the 1965 Riviera that you see here, and notice the thin horizontal blades. Well, that was inspired by another vehicle, the last of its kind, the 1940 LaSalle that you see here. Notice those thin horizontal blades in that midsection of the grille. That was the inspiration for that design cue that you just saw on the 63 to 65 Riviera. The LaSalle, what in the world does that have to do with the Buick Riviera? Well, as I said, the car was originally developed when it was styled as a proposal for the revival of the LaSalle nameplate. And if you don't believe me, let's take a look at some photos of what this LaSalle could have looked like now. And here you go. Here's an early styling study for the, LaSalle at the time. Notice that the vehicle really has the same front end, the same hood, similar fenders, but in this case, the headlamps are exposed, and there's also an inboard bright headlight. And the overall grille has that thin bladed texture that's going all the way across, as opposed to the egg crate pattern that would grace the front end of the 63 to 65 Riviera. You'll also note the script LaSalle there on the driver's side near that bright light, and some interestingly incorporated parking lamps there in the bumper. Overall, handsome design. And does this remind you of any other GM vehicle from the mid-1960s in terms of its front end? At least for me, it resembles the 1966 Chevy Nova, so perhaps part of that front end was recycled later on. Let's take a look at some other pictures of this LaSalle. And here you go. This is an earlier clay model dated June of 1960. You can see that it really looks like a 1963 to 65 Riviera. It has that roof line with the very tight creases on it. The daylight opening and the windshield is pretty much identical to the Riviera. Those fake hood scoops on the hood. There is no wind split molding here, although there is a ridge down the center of the hood. And of course, the front end has a bit different treatment. This biplane bumper that harkens back to some of the LaSalle styling cues before the marque was sunset. And you have that thin bladed grille that goes across the entire vehicle, helping accentuate the width of the car. And in this particular clay model, there appears to be just one set of headlights, or perhaps there's something concealed behind those fender forms, but I don't think so. I think this just has one set of exposed headlamps, as you can see it there. Interestingly, take a look at the fake vent in front of the rear wheel, and it's similar to the Riviera, but a bit more complicated in terms of its detail. Now we're going back in time a little bit, and you can see this model is from May of 1960, so just 1 month before the other one. Here, there's fully concealed headlamps on the front end, and that thin-bladed grille just goes across that entire front section uninterrupted by headlights, and the theme is also continued in the fronts of the fenders. Notice that biplane bumper here is also somewhat simplified. It's just a biplane over the fenders and a single bumper form in the middle of the vehicle. You also notice that this car has some different wheel arches to it. These are more Squircle style wheel arches than the previous vehicle, and they wouldn't be quite this square on the final 1963 to 65 Riviera. But the rest of the vehicle, that daylight opening, the roof line, the windshield, the fake hood scoops, all read the same as what would be out on the 63 to 65 Riviera in production. Now let's take a look out back at this LaSalle. Again, this is dated in May of 1960, and check out that rear biplane bumper. Pretty sweet. Something that obviously didn't make it to the final 63 to 65 Riviera. Although you can see from this particular view that characteristic Coke bottle shape of the car, where the sheet metal flares outboard near the rear wheel and upward too, is already present. And that was something that a number of cars were doing during the time. Was pretty trendy. Even the Studebaker Avanti had that sort of look to it. And it would continue as a General Motors styling cue for a number of years. Notice also the badging here on the trunk in the center. It has its own LaSalle badge. So it does not have a Buick badge or any division badge because, again, at this point, it was a LaSalle. I do love the exhaust tips there that have, I guess you'd call them, 3 little outlets that are stuck together. I wonder if Cadillac would later get the inspiration for its tri-tip exhaust that would find its way into the late 80s and early 90s STS and Eldorado Touring Coupe from this vehicle. I think it was just a coincidence, but they do look very similar in any case. And here's a different proposal for another rear end. This one is also dated May of 1960, but you can see here the bumper does not continue all the way across the vehicle. It breaks for the license plate, although it does still have that biplane theme. And notice the taillights here have little logos embedded within them. And of course you have the LaSalle script above the license plate there. So it's got a, well, different flair from what the car would end up with when it became the Buick Riviera. Certainly probably the most, I would say, different element here is that bumper. That, of course, there was no heritage from a Buick standpoint of the biplane bumper, and it just kind of went away as the car evolved. And here you go with the final version of what was then the LaSalle, and take a look at how gorgeous this vehicle is. It obviously is very Riviera, but it has some different styling cues. Again, the headlamps here are the single headlamps up front. That grille, as opposed to being the egg crate pattern, is the thin blade, just like the 1940 LaSalle. I can't quite make out the wheels, if those are turbine wheels or faux wire wheels with maybe some spinners. It's a bit hard to see, but those have changed here and would be similar to what would find their way on the Riviera. And this car that is cloaked in silver just looks absolutely gorgeous. You can see all the body lines, and I love the dual scallops on the hood there. It just looks especially handsome. Now, one of the things I just wanted to point out for you is I've noticed as I've looked at various vehicles from GM during this time period that front of the driver's and passenger's fender, take a look at that form in the upper portion of it. It actually was a pretty popular form on General Motors cars of the era. As an example, see here in this picture of a 1965 Cadillac how similar that fender tip form is to this 65 Cadillac. In other words, the fender has this crease at the top and then kind of droops downward as it starts to meet the headlights. And apparently this was something that I guess General Motors styling VP Bill Mitchell really loved. And I know on the 1965 Cadillac, he specifically told designers that he wanted that headlamp area to resemble the grille of a Miller race car. That was one of his favorite all-time vehicles, and it was also the inspiration for a number of other GM cars, including the 1969 Grand Prix with its relatively, let's call it, prominent grille that was also inspired by Miller. But as you look at a number of mid-60s GM cars, even this 1966 Nova, you notice that form replicating itself over and over again, and I have to wonder if that is just Bill Mitchell and his love for the Miller race car showing up, I won't say ubiquitously, but showing up on a number of GM vehicles during that time period. And I have to say, it was really handsome, and candidly, I never noticed that was something that was really seen across many GM vehicles during the time until I started doing these videos. In any case, now you know the design history of the 63 to 65 Riviera and where it started. We'll close out with a few last photos of a very special LaSalle proposal. Notice here it has hidden headlamps, and you have the, I guess I'll call it the LaSalle crest there that is on top of the headlamp doors. That biplane bumper is still there, at least over top of the fender forms. It's not spilling across the midsection of the vehicle, although you do have this interesting grille at the bottom where I suppose the radiator is supposed to take in the air because there's no other place on this front end for that to occur. So kind of a strange proposal, very electric vehicle-y, if you will. But of course, this wasn't an electric vehicle proposal back then. And the very handsome LaSalle script in the middle of the car. Now, this particular car is very special for one reason. Let's take a look at this second photo and see why. And here you have it. Yes, it's a four-door LaSalle proposal. And I think it's actually quite handsome. Take a look at that roofline. It's very similar to the two-door Riviera, but it obviously is longer to accommodate that rear door. And this is obviously a hardtop, not a pillared sedan. But the windshield and that daylight opening and the graphic associated with them is very similar to the two-door, just kind of elongated overall. I do like the skirted rear fender. That's particularly cool. I must admit that I'm a fan of skirted fender cars, so this does it for me. And you do see what appears to be maybe an extra feature line, or at least a more prominent one, that's lower on the body side, maybe halfway up the body side, that's different from the two-door Riviera. So this has a fair amount of similarity, but also some interesting differences versus the two-door, and some strange wheel covers that look like they're, I guess, I don't know, circles within a circle, similar to what Pontiac would have for wheel covers in the early 70s or around that time frame. So what do you think of this four-door Riviera? Was this a missed opportunity? Kind of strange when you think about it, because the 63 Riviera was really a response to the Ford Thunderbird, and a four-place vehicle, I should say a two-door four-place vehicle. So here, presumably GM was trying to do something a bit different when it was thinking about these LaSalle proposals. As you know, eventually Buick would get the LaSalle and turn it into the Riviera. And that was really because Chevrolet and Cadillac didn't want it. Both divisions were doing very well. Buick, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac then were bidding for the rights to have the car after GM Design had designed it. Buick won out after Pontiac lost because John DeLorean wanted to alter the styling, and GM styling chief Bill Mitchell said no, and Oldsmobile lost out because they also wanted to make some alterations. So Buick took it basically unaltered, very minor revisions as you see, and turned it into the gorgeous 63 to 65 Riviera. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care.